The BS Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects.
First of all,
This is the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
it might be cool, I don't know. And if it's not, I don't care.
The BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Bill Simmons works for ESPN. He's also named the sports guy, and he writes a comical sports column. He must be a popular dude.
The BS Report.
It's got a real dirty sound, like a rusty steak knife cutting through a well-aged steak.
Now.
Here's Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the BS Report Tuesday afternoon, and we ran the gamut of emotions digitally in the ESPN Internet Enterprises. On the downside, we premiered House Seats 3 on Grantland, which was one of the most disgusting things that's ever been put on the Internet. People loved it, I guess. I think they love being disgusted by it. I don't know. Proceed at your own risk with that. But on the flip side, one of the best pieces we've run on the website in some time, Don Van Natta's piece for ESPN the magazine about Roger Goodell, a reported feature about his commissionership, or whatever that word is, commissioner reign, commissioner. What word is that? Commissionership?
I think commissionership works, yeah, Bill. I think that
Commissionership. So now Don joins us on the BS Report. How long did you work on that piece?
I started working on it in October, so it's been about 5 months.
October.
Yeah. The first thing I did is I called the NFL league office and I asked to speak to the commissioner, and they thought about it for a day or two and then said no, and then I just started working, started reporting.
So you did the move where you just started reporting it anyway, and eventually they have to cooperate because you're talking to everybody else who's involved.
That was the plan, Bill, but actually the commissioner said no to me 5 times, which I think is a new indoor record.
What now? I'm always interested when people decide whether to cooperate or not cooperate with a story like this. Did you feel like, because you started reporting this right after the replacement ref fiasco, and he, at that point, between that and Bountygate, Goodell was taking about as big of a beating as he had taken during his entire reign. So my guess is maybe he was just like, maybe I don't need the media right now.
Yeah, you'd think that, but he wasn't hiding. He cooperated with the Time magazine cover story at the same time. It was published in November.
I forgot about that. You're right.
Yeah, and he did interviews with the NFL Network, with Bob Schieffer on CBS on Super Bowl Sunday morning. He did a Reddit interview. He was on Sirius Satellite Radio Town Hall meeting. He did, he wasn't hiding. He was out there.
He talked to Peter King.
He talked to the New York Times and Judy Battista over the holidays. So he did quite a bit of media during the period of time he refused to speak with me.
That's pretty interesting. And he talked to Peter King, too. Yeah, it does seem like he picks and chooses what kind of stories he wants written about him. And I do feel like I started writing about this about 2 years ago. I felt like there was a chasm between the way the mainstream media was writing about him versus what was actually happening. And I think those first couple of years, he did a really masterful job of controlling the message about him. Do you agree with that?
I do. And I think he still does a masterful job at controlling the message, despite a really bad year, as you said, with the referees lockout and the Bountygate scandal and his missteps there. I still think, the NFL, as I said to people, Bill, I've covered the White House, the Clinton administration when I was at the New York Times. I've covered the CIA after 9/11. That was good preparation for doing this piece and dealing with the NFL. They're very, very good at brand management. They're excellent.
So the big shadow that's hanging over this whole thing and over Goodell's commissionership is the concussion lawsuits, and just when did they know? When did they start to care? Was there a lapse between the time frame of when they started to care and when they publicly started to care and all this stuff? And it's really muddled for me. And I hate to be too cynical about this stuff, and I like to believe the best in people, but it's really hard not to look at this and think this league knew that these concussions were bad and didn't really spring into action until they started to get worried about these lawsuits. And that's a big part of the piece you wrote today. after you did all the research, after you talked to everybody, where do you stand on this? When did they know, and when did they actually start doing stuff?
Well, Roger Goodell went before the House Judiciary Committee in October of 2009, and that's kind of the seminal moment of the way the league handled the concussion lawsuit for me, and the whole concussion issue. And when he went there, Bill, he said to them, there's no link. You just refused to say there was any link between playing professional football and cognitive erosion. But despite there being all these independent studies, and he was really pressed pretty hard on this point, and he just refused to say there was a link. And then quietly, a month later, the league sort of acknowledged that there might be a link. But even as recently as Super Bowl Sunday this year, when Goodell went on CBS with Bob Schieffer, he still refused to say there's a link, despite, even more studies now than there were available in 2009. And so the real danger of the concussion litigation, and now there's more than 4,000 former players suing the league, and that's 1/3 of all the former players alive today. It's a really pretty stunning number when you think about it.
Yeah.
The danger of that is if it gets into discovery, then those plaintiffs' lawyers are going to be able to go back and look to see exactly what the league knew before 2009, before Goodell became commissioner, when Tagliabue was commissioner, going back to the 90s. And that's the real danger of that lawsuit. But to answer your question, I don't know. I really don't know what they knew. I certainly know that Roger Goodell is telling us now that he's very sincere about it. He talks a lot about it. But we really won't know until the discovery process begins in this litigation, if it's allowed to begin. And that's still down the road a ways.
Well, a couple of follow-up notes on that. One, we really started to know in the mid-'90s, and there's even a scene in the beginning of Jerry Maguire, one of the first scenes when the son of, I think it was a hockey player, starts yelling at Jerry Maguire about how his dad kept playing with all those concussions, and he knew. So for anybody to say, oh, in 2009, that's when we realized, like, here's a movie that was written in 1995 that has concussions as, kind of a key plot point in the early part of the movie.
Oh,
so
yeah,
you're
absolutely
that's disingenuous,
right?
Right? Troy Aikman had to retire because of concussions. Eric Lindros had to retire because, his career was never the same because of concussions. So we all kind of knew. I feel like the thing that maybe we didn't know was, or that we just weren't educated on was the danger of having more than 2 concussions, just what that meant long-term for a human being. And that's what's changed, I think. What do you think?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. There certainly was a recognized danger through the 90s. But if you're going to judge Goodell, though, it's pretty incredible, Bill, that as recently as October 2009, when, as you say, it was known in the 90s, these dangers, he's still refusing before Congress to say there's any link between playing professional football and long-term health effects, for your brain. To me, that's pretty stunning.
Yeah, and you also, I think, when Chris Nowitzki in the institute in Massachusetts that he started, when they started studying the brains and stuff, I think that started like 2006. Alan Schwartz from the New York Times, when you were there, was writing about it. He was the first. Gladwell got involved with the New Yorker. By 2009, we had 3 years of writing about concussions and real evidence that something was happening here. And people were kind of waiting for the NFL to do something, and they just didn't. What do you think took them so long?
I think that they were very, very concerned about what it could do to the business. I mean, if you believe Goodell and you believe the owners, they were concerned about it, and they were tinkering with the game. They were changing the rules. What Goodell always says is he's trying to make the game safer for the players and more exciting for the fans. But I think that they ignored and downplayed independent studies all through that period of time that you referenced, and really have been fighting a public relations battle in the last 2 years, and certainly in the last year, to show that they really care about it. That's these ads, these evolution ads that we saw during the Super Bowl, and it's a huge PR campaign for the league to sell this to the public. I'm not so sure the public's buying it. I know that the players, for the most part, and the union leadership are not buying it.
Here's the two things that I just look at this and it makes me angry. I don't like when people are hypocrites. two things here. One, pushing for the 18-game schedule.
Yeah.
So hypocritical. And DeMaurice Smith had just an awesome quote in your piece about this, where he just skewers him, and it's so 100% justified. You have this commissioner who's allegedly cared about the long-term health of his players and the injury risk, and yet is pushing for 2 more games, under this caveat of, we're going to get rid of 2 exhibition games, so it'll be totally different. And meanwhile, you add 2 games to a season where guys are already going down left and right. One of the most short-sighted. I mean, how does he justify that?
I don't know how he justifies it. I wasn't able to ask him that question. That probably would have been the first question I would have asked him if he would have sat down with me for an interview. But DeMaurice Smith does call him out. And one of the quote, I've never heard a quote like that in my 25-year career as a journalist. I mean, he says that Goodell has it covered both ways. It's a short-term gain and a long-term gain to have an 18-game season. The short-term gain is you grow revenue instantly with 2 additional regular season games. The long-term gain is that more players are going to get injured if you're playing an 18-game season. And then so more players won't vest with their pensions. And as DeMaurice Smith says, he calls it diabolically brilliant. I can't believe he said that to me on the record. But I think there's some truth to it. And, Goodell has quietly tried, Bill, in the last few months to sort of retreat from it. He doesn't talk about it as much. It's still out there. It's still on the table. But he's not pushing it nearly as aggressively as he was in the run-up to this season and even in the early weeks of this past season. And I think it's because of this criticism that it is diametrically opposed to a commissioner who says his top priority is improving the health and safety of the players.
Diabolically brilliant is one of the best things anybody's ever said about anybody, and should absolutely be the book. When somebody writes the book Taking Down Goodell, which I'm sure will happen in the next 3 years, that should be the title, because it's 100% justified. And, the little spin-off point on that is doing the Thursday games every week. I don't know how you claim to care about player safety and then have these guys playing on Sunday and then Thursday, when it would be so easy to structure the bye weeks to prevent anybody from playing 2 games in 4 days.
Yeah, excellent point.
The fact that they don't care about that, but then also are making this big hullabaloo about player safety. So that's my first thing about how I think they're hypocritical.
Well, Bill, don't forget Goodell's also been talking in recent weeks about expanding the playoffs.
Right.
So, to have another couple games in the playoffs. This is the reason for this. I want to make this really clear. He has an incredibly ambitious goal. Goodell said to the league owners a couple of years ago behind a closed door, he said by 2027, he wanted annual revenues to grow to $25 billion. They're not even at $10 billion yet. They're going to hit $10 billion next year. So in 14 years, he wants to grow revenues $15 billion, $1 billion a year. So you've got to get very creative to find ways to hit that target, which is why we're hearing about an expanded season, expanded playoffs, there's Thursday Night Football, all of these things to hit that mark.
Yeah, and I would argue he has a chance to hit that goal because within about a year, you're going to have 4 24-hour sports channels. Right. You're going to have NBC, CBS, Fox, and ABC. You're going to have even like wild cards that we might not even be seeing right now, like USA, TNT, channels like that. It only takes 2 idiots to drive a price up, And
no, that's true. And in 2014, of course, the television contracts, go up exponentially, and they don't expire until 2022. So you figure, yes, if there's 4 or 5 or 6 competitive bidders at that period of time, yeah, he probably will hit the target. He might even exceed it.
Yeah. Well, so the other thing that I think they've been really hypocritical about is something I wrote a month ago, and it's about their plan to curtail PEDs in football. And, right now, the way it works, and this is something that was negotiated by the Players Association, and I think was a real mistake. I like DeMaurice Smith. I think he's done a good job. I think this is a bad look for him, not revealing what the suspensions were for the drugs and allowing all these guys to just say they took Adderall when obviously they didn't. That's one issue. The other thing is that they have blood testing now and biological passports and ways to really prove definitively, at least within, pretty reasonable accuracy whether somebody's gaming the system or not and pumping themselves with HGH or steroids or whatever they're doing. And I don't understand how you can claim to care about player safety and head-to-head hits and helmet-to-helmet, all that stuff, but at the same time allow these guys to juice up, and which makes them run faster, it makes them stronger. And if anybody thinks that, 40 to 50% of this league isn't doing something, they're insane. They're fooling themselves. So why do you think why hasn't that been part of this whole player safety part?
Yeah, you're right, and that 40 to 50% might even be a low estimate.
Yeah, I was being nice.
Yeah, the irony, Bill, of this is the union and DeMaurice Smith are sort of playing the HGH issue with the league the way the league was playing concussions for years. And the league for years was saying, well, we don't think the science is necessarily there yet. There's a debate among doctors. We've got to let the research continue. And that's the exact position that DeMaurice Smith has carved out for himself on HGH, which is, and on both sides, it's just not a strong position that you can take when you really look closely at the facts. And I agree. I think there is it's a problem for the union and for DeMaurice Smith, and it's one of the real sticking points. I mean, I make the point in the magazine piece that the divide between Goodell and the players has never been as wide, and there was a little bit of pushback from the league office on Sunday over this. I just don't know how you can argue it. On almost every issue, there is a huge divide, and particularly on this HGH issue, and I don't see it being solved anytime soon.
That's a great point on DeMaurice Smith, and I would like to invite him to come on this podcast at any point to discuss any of this stuff. I think it's hypocritical on his part to crush Goodell on being a hypocrite for the concussion stuff, and yet on his watch, he's not really doing anything to stop PEDs, and the reason he's not doing it is because there's probably such a large part of the league that is doing something that, at some point you're looking at a majority vote, and I think the part that people don't realize is they do test for some stuff, but it's, you're talking about like levels of testosterone or whatever, and it's so easy to kind of cheat your testosterone level to get to a certain point. I mean, some of the stuff we saw this season, especially with recovery, was just too far-fetched. Ray Lewis coming back from a torn tricep in 2 months was impossible. It just shouldn't be able to happen. Terrell Suggs ripping his Achilles tendon and being able to come back for the exhibition season is insane. It just shouldn't happen. And I don't understand, if we're so worried about helmet-to-helmet hits, why we're not worried about this stuff.
I agree. There's these miracles of science that occur, almost every other week now, and never really explained. And I couldn't agree more with you that there's some nonsense going on behind the scenes that the union, quite frankly, does not want, is not prepared to take that step yet, and the hypocrisy is really clear cut.
It's just hypocrisy everywhere. And for God's sakes, watch a football game from like 1975. Notice the size of the guys. I know there's evolution, but it's not that much evolution. Weightlifting equipment doesn't do everything. You don't turn 230-pound offensive linemen into 380-pound offensive linemen. It's just not realistic.
And also the speed of the game is the other thing too. I mean, so you have these guys so much bigger, and they're also so much faster and hitting each other so much harder. It looks like it's in slow motion when you see, film from the 60s and 70s. Different game.
Yeah, I'm sure that's why. It seems like so many guys go down now, and so many guys get their bell rung, and so many guys have concussions. And I do think a big, I'm sure diagnosis is part of it, and we're just better at recognizing the signs and recognizing somebody got their bell rung. But also, if guys are moving faster and guys are bigger and stronger, it's just common sense. At some point, it's science. And you take one force going against another force past a certain speed, and bad things are going to happen. If you had a chance to ask Goodell 3 questions, what would the 3 questions have been?
Well, I would have asked him about, how he reconciles the 18-game season and the Thursday Night Football expansion and all of that with player safety. I would have asked him about Bountygate, and I would have simply said, were you motivated by anything other than the facts when you laid down those suspensions?
Well, what do you think those motivations would have been?
Well, I think that, the criticism of him, and the thing I would have wanted to ask him, is whether or not he was motivated by the concussion lawsuit. He seized an opportunity here. He moved very, very fast. Remember, when he announced Bountygate in March of last year, it was actually a year ago this week, he said there were 27 Saints players that participated. He didn't suspend anybody. He only suspended the GM and the coach and the assistant coaches at that time. And a couple months went by, and then he only suspended 4, even though 27 participated, and they were the team leaders, as he said. And I just think, looking at it very carefully, Bill, and I read every document. I got the Tagliabue transcript of that 4-day appeal that occurred in November and December. This investigation was not up to the standard that it should have been. First of all, they only interviewed one player, Anthony Hargrove.
That's amazing.
He was a guy, of course, who got hammered for that. He was talked to in 2010, and they really put a lot. Almost the entire investigation was based on Cirillo, the former Saints assistant coach, and Williams, and what they said. All the documents they had that they got out of New Orleans are really about a pay-for-performance system, that they sort of projected that this was a bounty system on them. And the way they handled, there were so many accusations that were made publicly, like this videotape with Anthony Hargrove. Hargrove was really made to be the public villain of the Bountygate scandal in a way that I think was really unfair, and it probably ended his career. They said he was on this videotape saying, "Bob, you gave me my money." He says it wasn't him. I'm absolutely convinced it wasn't him.
Wow.
And then they sort of quietly retreated from it in a memo, and never apologized to the guy. There was accusations made about Vilma on a bounty on Kurt Warner that really didn't hold up when you look carefully at the Tagliabue transcript, which of course they never released. So the whole handling of it, the hyperbole so far exceeded, in my view, what the evidence was. And it was really like a typical prosecutor overreaching. And so the question for Goodell is why? And now, John Mara, the owner of the Giants, told me it was because he was deeply offended by the idea that players would pay other players to hurt opponents. And they would so eagerly participate in that. But all the players adamantly denied it. And as we saw, Paul Tagliabue, overturned those suspensions and actually had some very, I thought, tough words for his protege in Goodell. And I interviewed Tagliabue for this piece, and he was extremely candid what he had to say about Goodell, in particular, calling him a victim. Couldn't believe that. Paul Tagliabue said that Roger Goodell is a victim of Bountygate. The players were victims, and so was Roger Goodell. And that's some news.
Well, that was my favorite part of Bountygate, was that Goodell handled this so badly that his old boss had to come back and kind of fix the mess that Goodell had made. Right. I mean, it's almost unprecedented. Like, I imagine, like, if, at some point I'd turn Grantland over to somebody else. If that guy did such a bad job that I had to come back to judge some mistake he made, I'd feel like I had hired the wrong guy. It's just, and then the other part that really hasn't received a lot of attention, Sean Payton getting suspended for a year, which really killed the Saints season. And then as more and more stuff comes out, and it seems like Goodell might have acted a little bit rashly. Like, how do you feel about that suspension now?
Yeah, no, it blew up the season, and Williams, who was the architect of the entire alleged bounty system, he's going to be back on the sidelines next year with the Titans. So, like what happens again, to just draw out my prosecutor analogy, the guy that flips and testifies against other people, in this case the players, he's already back in Goodell's good graces.
He's a stoolie.
He had an indefinite suspension, Bill. Think about that. He's already going to be back on the sideline in September. Hargrove's not going to be playing, but Williams is going to be back on the sideline.
So what would the third question have been that you would have asked Goodell? We've had 2.
I probably would have asked him, I would have tried to find out more about his sincerity on player safety. One of the things that I found out from his friends is that Goodell, I'm told, has this great fear that a player is going to die on the field. And it only happened once. Chuck Hughes died, the Lions wide receiver, in 1971. And Goodell has talked about it and confided this fear to his friends. And I think I would have asked him that. I would have said, why do you fear that? What have you done to prevent it? Do you think you've done enough if people stood in your way? I think I would have tried to go down that road.
Is it possible? I mean, we see this happen a lot. We see it happen with coaches a lot, and even in real life, in companies or, any walk of life, this can happen. Somebody gets promoted one spot higher than they should have been. Some people are just meant to be offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators, assistant commissioners, etc. Is it possible that it happened here?
It's possible, but I'm not so sure you can say that yet. The owners who hired Goodell had a choice. It was either Roger Goodell, who had spent his entire adult life in the NFL, and it was his dream, basically since he was a teenager, to be the NFL commissioner. Or they could have hired Greg Levy, who, like Paul Tagliabue, was an attorney. Goodell is not an attorney. He's basically, a league lifer, PR guy. But Greg Levy was an attorney, and Goodell was chosen on the fifth ballot. I mean, it was split. I mean, it was very tough. But Goodell, the owners are thrilled with him, Bill. I mean, you saw the quotes. Robert Kraft says that Goodell runs the NFL as if he owns it, that the league literally belongs to him. And Jerry Jones, calls him a grow the pie thinker. So, they could not be happier with Goodell. And when I interviewed Kraft in Foxborough in December, I was surprised. I was kind of pushing him about all the players' criticism of Goodell. And Kraft sort of said, I don't focus on that. It's almost as if Kraft was saying, I don't care what the players think of Goodell. They expect Goodell to be unpopular with the players. And they just sort of chalk that up, and it doesn't worry them at all. The thing they look at is the bottom line, and that's moving in the right direction. And the franchises every year grow 7%. Dallas Cowboys are worth $2.1 billion. The only team worth more is Manchester United. So, the owners are doing great, and they love Goodell. They can't love him anymore.
In your piece, you had an interesting anecdote about as the lockout was approaching and heating up, and he went to see a couple teams, and he was visiting the Colts, and things got really acrimonious, and he actually had to kind of be escorted out because the players are getting madder and madder. Is it possible that Goodell took this job thinking, I'm going to be great because I get the players and I'm going to be buddies with those guys, but then I'm in with the owners too, and then gradually came to realize, oh yeah, if I'm on the owner's side, I can't also be a friend to the players?
Yeah, I mean, DeMaurice Smith talked about that anecdote. Jeff Saturday had to cut this meeting short in the summer of 2010. Goodell was sort of telling the players, listening to their concerns, but saying, "Look, I'm here for you too. I'm not only the owner's representative. I'm going to be looking out for your interests too. If we go to a lockout." And according to DeMaurice Smith, the players were deeply offended, got really raucous, and they had to take him out. And watch Goodell next month. This is really interesting. At the NFL draft, every first round draft choice that steps out on that stage, Goodell hugs.
Bear hugs.
Yeah, bear hugs, like for 15 seconds sometimes. And it's almost as if it's like, okay, well, you still got a shot with the rookies.
Right.
He's still they don't hate him yet, or they don't dislike him yet. But the veterans, many of them, have made up their mind, and I think a lot of it has to do with the lockout. There is a sense. I know you know this, Bill. I mean, that the owners they really want it. They won the most. Goodell's absolute power is undiminished, and on the money side, they did quite well. And I think that a lot of the acrimony between Goodell and DeMaurice Smith is rooted in what occurred in 2011, and through my reporting, it certainly has gotten progressively worse over the last 2 years in the relationship between Goodell and Smith.
Over the last probably 15 months, I think I've written 4 or 5 pieces that had Goodell at the center, were criticizing him, at least a couple about David Stern and what happened with the NBA lockout and the owners and how they handled that, and then even 1 or 2 Gary Bettman columns going after him. And a reader sent me an email saying, I don't understand why you get so upset about the commissioners as if they're the ones doing this. Why don't you realize that it's the owners who are doing this? These guys are just the front men, the commissioners are the front men just carrying out the wishes of these owners. The owners are the ones who are the problem. Do you think that's a fair assessment of everything that's happened with the NFL these past couple of years?
I think that for the most part, Goodell does what the owners want. I do think they give him latitude on things. There's actually a really interesting example of that with the referees lockout. Goodell, as you said earlier, just got smashed last September over that. And, it was so embarrassing to the league. It was just a public relations disaster. But my reporting showed that actually Goodell recognized, even before the season started, that this is really just, relatively speaking, a handful of nickels that the referees and the owners were fighting over. And he kind of saw it coming. He saw that this could potentially be a disaster, but he sort of fell in line. The owners wanted it. And so, he was the public spokesman for it. John Mara told me on the record, don't blame Goodell. This was really a group of owners that very stubbornly fought this fight. So I think in that instance, it's absolutely true what the person who emailed you, and I think the general perception that Goodell, really just does what they say. But I think they give him a lot of latitude on player safety, with the exception that clearly there's a team of very high-priced, white shoe law firm attorneys telling him, be very, very careful what you say, which is why we see him, tying himself up into knots in front of Congress, and he sits with Bob Schieffer on Super Bowl Sunday about the linkage. But I think actually on Bountygate and on a lot of this punishment stuff, it really is Goodell being Goodell. It's Goodell. Think about it. Anytime somebody comes into a job, they're always trying to make a mark from their predecessor. And the criticism of Commissioner Tagliabue is that he was too soft on discipline. Yep. He was too close to Gene Upshaw. And so this is Goodell, really distancing himself from Tagliabue, from his mentor. And so I think that, and I asked the owners about this and some of the executives and former executives, and I really do think on discipline, it's Roger Goodell kind of doing it his way.
You're
not sure.
Well, it's a tough one because I'm asking a person to have a sense of the greater good at all times, and people just rarely have that. And in this case, he knew the replacement refs were a terrible idea after 3 solid years of rhetoric about how player safety was now the new big concern for this league. And then they put these guys out there with terrible refs. And it's just so blatantly hypocritical that it makes me wonder why he didn't say, you know what, this one time, this makes me look so bad that I'm going to have to at least leak publicly that I didn't agree with this decision.
But he didn't even do that, though. But no, look, I agree. Look, the officials are the last line of defense, on player safety. And Goodell did an interview after the first week of the season with Politico, and he said, yeah, these replacement referees did an outstanding job, and they're going to get better. And, you compare that to, what I heard, that he was behind a closed door fighting against it. I mean, it's just, it's not just hypocritical. It's disingenuous at best. I mean,
right.
So I couldn't agree more. And, for years, you can't talk about player safety being your top concern and then allow these, lingerie league refs and, Division II and Division III refs out there, protecting the health of the quarterback. I mean, it just doesn't add up.
I really get frustrated about this. I feel like football's in trouble. And the way people are watching it has changed. What's weird is it's just as popular as it ever was. But as you said, I think there's a real reason why Goodell might have that fear about the death on the field, because it feels like there is a tipping point moment coming. And I don't know whether it's a massive PD scandal or a helmet hit on the field where the guy just dies right away or whatever. But at some point, we're going to hit the point that boxing hit, when boxing, something changed, We grew up, how old are you?
I'm 48.
Yeah, so we grew up with Ali and
Yep.
and what boxing meant to that generation growing up versus where boxing is now. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that, in my opinion anyway, that Ali became this guy who couldn't even speak in public. And it happened because of all the fights that he did. And, you know, they can say it was Parkinson's, but I'm going to choose to believe it was the 250 extra rounds that he fought after his prime where people just punched him in the head. That
Bill,
changed boxing.
Bill, if a player dies on the field, it's obviously a huge tragedy. But from a business standpoint, it sounds cold to say that, but you've got to look at it that way. It's a tragedy from a business standpoint because already there is this drumbeat of stories that are in the media and on television, including by broadcast partners of the NFL, about guys like Leroy Horde and Jim McMahon, and these veterans that are struggling, and the Junior Seau suicide. I mean, a guy always with a smile on his face, always upbeat. That was a tipping point, arguably. Those stories are going to continue. And, the league is extremely sensitive about it. I write a little bit about that in this piece and how they try to manage it. Terry Bradshaw goes on The Tonight Show and last June and tells Jay Leno, the league really doesn't care about this stuff. They care about it because they're worried about the litigation and they're worried about the public relations of it. And I'm told Goodell just goes ballistic. It's really, really angry. And so they're very, very sensitive about it. And I agree. I love the game. It's my favorite sport. I've loved it since I was a kid. I'm a forever suffering Minnesota Vikings fan. And I love it. And I watch it nonstop. It drives my wife crazy. But it's got a lot of problems. It's in trouble. And it needs a leader. It needs a commissioner who can reach out across these divides to players, to executives, bring everybody together and try to deal with these problems in a really open, transparent way. And that hasn't happened. And this commissioner's style, his manner, even Tagliabue says it. Tagliabue on the record in my story says, Goodell's problem is his style. He comes across as uncompromising. And there's so much distrust and mistrust right now among the players and the union leadership. I don't know whether they're equipped really to handle the crisis that they're in the midst of and the crisis that's going to get worse down the road.
You touched on that sensitivity, which popped up a couple times in your piece. It did make me think, ESPN is one of the NFL's biggest partners, if not the biggest. And we have this piece in ESPN, the magazine, and running on ESPN.com that's critical of the commissioner. Do you feel like there's going to be any backlash about that from the NFL?
I hope not. They didn't really cooperate much with my piece. They saw me as a reporter with, an investigative reporting background, and they were quite leery of me. But our bosses let me do my thing. I mean, they gave me this assignment. They got out of the way, and not once did I feel as if they, put the brakes on this project. And whether or not there's any consequences to it, I sure hope not. But I don't know. I'd be guessing.
It's funny, ESPN takes a lot of crap, and I'm not saying some of it isn't justified. And in fact, I agree with some of the crap, but I don't agree with some of the crap. And one of the things that I don't think the company gets credit for is allowing, some of its best writers and columnists to be candid about what they think. I can't remember the last time somebody told me you shouldn't have written that. Don't write that. Check with me the next time. They allow a certain level of candor in ESPN, the magazine, in ESPN.com, and definitely on Grantland, where not once has anybody told us that we shouldn't have run something. I don't think the company gets enough credit for that. I just had to say that.
Bill, I couldn't agree more. And, when I just got hired by the company January 2012, and we had a meeting in the summer. We were kicking ideas around, and the first idea I had, the thing I really wanted to do was a Roger Goodell investigative profile, because I feel as if one really great one hadn't been done.
Yeah.
And, when they gave me the assignment, like I said, they just said, go do your thing. And they got out of the way. I mean, they were incredibly supportive throughout. But, ESPN does not get the credit it deserves for the investment it's made in long-form journalism and investigative journalism. And it keeps getting stronger. They just hired, Steve Faineru, a Pulitzer Prize winner, who's done some great stuff on the player safety crisis. And
Last question for me. How does one decide investigative journalism? That's what I want to do. Like, what was the tipping point for you? At what age did you realize this is what you're going to do? Because in my opinion, it's the most complicated journalism route you can take.
Well, I was lucky, Bill. I started, my first job was at the Miami Herald, which is a pretty good first job right out of school. And very early on, I worked with a reporter named Jeff Lean, who is a multi-Pulitzer Prize-winning editor now at the Washington Post. And I just thought Jeff was cool. I mean, I just kind of stumbled into it. I was in my mid-20s.
Yeah.
And I thought this guy is like a great guy. Like, you know, he doesn't just write down what people say. He's not a stenographer. He tries to get to the truth of every story, and that's what I wanted to do. And so, you know, 26, 27, I sort of made up my mind, and I've been lucky for 20 years I've been doing this kind of work. It's extremely difficult. It's frustrating at times because you're sort of out of, you know, you're not in the newspaper if you're a newspaper person. You're not in the magazine if you're writing for a magazine for months at a time sometimes, and you go down these dark alleys, and oftentimes, you know, it's like a maze. This kind of work, You can't get out. But when it's good, when it's right, there's a huge payoff, and obviously there's a huge appetite in this country for this kind of work, and fewer of us are doing it. And I see it as a great privilege to be able to do this kind of work for a place that has the resources to allow me to go, you know, for 4 or 5 months on one subject. That's pretty remarkable.
And I would imagine in 2013 the process has really changed than, you know, been much different than, say, 1998, because in the Twitter era, everybody is rushing to get a story out. And when you're rushing, sometimes you cut corners, sometimes you put something up before that last interview gets done and things like that, which defeats the purpose of basically everything you're trying to do with one of these features. It's like putting a pie in the oven. You can't pull the pie. You've got to wait till it bakes and it comes out at a certain time. Do you feel like more and more pies are getting pulled out of the oven too soon lately?
Oh, yeah. Yep, absolutely. Monty Teo. That was a pie that was never baked. You know, there's a lot of examples of that. The Twitter age, the attention span just keeps shortening of people. But see, I think weirdly, though, paradoxically, that's why long form, I think, has become even more popular, because it's a rare thing, and people do want writers and journalists and columnists to go deep on subjects and give them an understanding beyond the quick hit, who got injured, who can't play Sunday, who just signed a contract, that kind of reporting. I mean, that's the meat and potatoes of sports reporting. I'm not denigrating it, but to be able to kind of look behind the headlines and do some of the kind of work you do at Grantland and we do it in the magazine, I think that people are really hungering for it and will continue to, which is good news for you and me, Bill.
I agree. I would imagine that it would be much easier in 2013 with the internet to like research stories and try to find people and stuff like that. Is that accurate?
Yes. Yeah, it is. But I sometimes find, though, that people are, in 2013, are a little more savvy about whether or not they should talk and about how to thwart guys like me. I mean, there's so many more PR people and crisis managers and crisis communications people. You know, people like Ari Fleischer making, nice bank to get corporations to not cooperate or to thwart investigative reporters finding out the truth about their companies than there were even in the 90s. And so there's fewer of us and there's a lot more of them. So we're actually outnumbered pretty significantly. So it's a very, very tough job. But as I say, if you're persistent enough, you keep at it, it's extremely rewarding when it works.
Every investigative reporter I've ever talked to always say that anything they've ever done, they always felt like they were one interview away. And they never did the piece where it's just they had every single piece of the jigsaw puzzle that they wanted. Did you ever have a piece that just every piece was there?
I don't think so. I think maybe the closest piece was the phone hacking scandal in the UK. The Murdoch phone hacking scandal, the News of the World. I did that for the Times. We did a magazine piece I worked on with two colleagues, and just about everything that we wanted. It was one of those just, incredible stories that everything fell into place. And I'm really proud of that story. It ran in September of 2010, and it forced Scotland Yard to reopen the criminal investigation. Everything that's followed from that was in large part because of our work. The Guardian, of course, did incredible work the following summer when they broke the $1 million thing. But we were there, and nobody was there, Bill. I mean, even the Guardian had sort of stopped covering it the way we did. And I spent 5 months in London, and it just everything clicked. And so I think it might have only happened once, but it's true. I mean, on the Goodell story, there were so many owners I wanted to talk with. There was so much I wanted to do that folks wouldn't talk to me. Or interference was run. So I think that's true of every investigative story. There's always, it's not just one, it's oftentimes a dozen more you wish you could have done.
What's the best story that you worked on that fell through because you just couldn't get it going, but you remained disappointed about it? Or maybe you can't answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, there were quite a few after 9/11. I was in London for the Times for a few years, and I was trying to write about extraordinary rendition and what the CIA was doing, picking people up off the street and torturing them and all that. And it was really, really hard. There was a number of stories that I tried to do that I couldn't do. But my colleagues in the press, Dana Priest from the Washington Post, Pulitzer for the Black site, she did an incredible job. And Jim Risen at the Times and other people, did a better job than I did during that period. And but the best get of all, though, Bill, is the thing that I enjoyed the most. I'm an investigative reporter. It was when I played golf with Bill Clinton in 2001. I don't even know if you know this story. I played golf with Clinton in 2002, and cheated his way around the golf course with me in front of me. It was amazing. He knew I was there basically to see whether he cheats at golf, and he had an 82 in his scorecard when we were done, and took nearly 200 swings. And,
right.
It helped. It really helped sell my first book called First Off the Tee. And so, that wasn't even really investigative reporting. That was just being there with a notebook. So,
right.
The way Wright Thompson did with Michael Jordan. I mean, sometimes a great reporting is you're just observing and listening and writing down these remarkable things that are happening right in front of you, and then telling it the right way.
Yeah, sometimes you just know it's falling into your lap.
Right.
And you just, at that point, you're driving a cruise ship, and you're just trying to keep it straight.
That's right, exactly.
You don't even have to do anything. I actually felt that way last week when we had Mike Tyson on the BS Report, and I had Jalen with me, and Tyson was just in rare form. And about 3 minutes in, I was like, oh, wow, this is going to be like the easiest 45 minutes I've ever had on this podcast. To just wind him up and let him go. What's your next thing you're working on? Or you can't say?
Haven't decided yet. We have a few interesting ideas kicking around, but we'll decide soon and launch on it. Whatever it'll be challenging. It'll be fun.
Has it been difficult to work with somebody who has such a massive ego like Chad Millman, just is such a prima donna, or has that been okay for you?
It's been a process. No, I love Chad, and he's probably most responsible for me, reinventing myself in my mid-40s, leaving the New York Times and coming to ESPN, and I think the magazine, under Chad, it's sucking up clearly, but I just think it's fantastic. I think he's really, re-energized the magazine.
I agree. He's done a terrific job. He's a friend of the BS Report. You did a great job with this piece. I urge everybody to read it. It's on ESPN, the magazine, I guess, comes out this Friday, but it's online already, and it looks great, and I was riveted by it. Good job. Hopefully we'll have you on next time you have a big story we can talk about here. Thanks for the time.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate it.
So I get to sign off. Whoa!
Thank you for downloading the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at Pod Center at ESPNradio.com.
Peace out.